watching the IDF bombings on Gaza, but now the editorial apologized, saying, "We appreciate that in using the Star of David and the yarmulke in this cartoon, the newspaper evoked an inappropriate element of religion rather than of nationhood."
I want to involve also our i24 News correspondent in London, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning, Yael.
So we do see these cartoons and caricatures. It's not the first time that we've seen it in the British press or in the global press. Was this specific picture catching you by surprise, or is it something more of the same?
Here in the UK, we're used to seeing a variety of cartoon images in the newspapers. The Guardian has a couple of times in the past fallen down on this issue of anti-Semitic cartoons. And this time around, the Times newspaper has been quite interesting. It seems to have been alternating fairly evenly between what one might call pro-Israel and anti-Israel cartoons. But specifically crossing a line into anti-Semitism is exactly what's key. And I think that cartoons and press coverage and public action is where we need to look most carefully. There's been a distinct rise in anti-Semitic activity, as you know, in Europe, and we've been reporting on that over the last few weeks. And that has been, no doubt, spurred on by the activities in Gaza at the moment. But what many in Europe are starting to say is that it goes well beyond that, and that all that has happened is there's something of a perfect storm at the moment, whereby the operation in Gaza, coupled with the financial austerity across Europe, the large and increasing Muslim population, and then some part of that population having within it an anti-Semitism problem, the extreme left having lost many of its traditional battles and searching for new ones, and various other factors are all feeding in to what is being called the new anti-Semitism. But really, there's nothing that new about the new anti-Semitism.
And of course, Jonathan, when we look at the apology that was issued, do you think it's due to public pressure, as you said, or due to perhaps the editorials at these papers understanding that the situation is very, the thin line is getting thinner between this anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism?
To many, the line is pretty clear. It's fine to criticize and to debate Israel's policies, but it's obviously not fine when you cross over and start criticizing Jews for the actions of the State of Israel. That particular cartoon, I'm sure the public opinion and the popular complaints caused some sort of apology, especially as the editor is said to have changed his mind somewhat. But if you look at the image, it's pretty clear. A hooked-nosed old man, a kippah, these things are not signs of Israeliness. They are signs of stereotypical Jewishness from an anti-Semitic perspective. And I think that when editors don't see these things before they put them in the newspaper, we realize that we're living in an era when anti-Semitism has crossed into a certain level of acceptance. For an editor to even consider publishing some of the anti-Semitic images that one sees today in mainstream newspapers across the world, there needs to be a climate which somehow accepts anti-Semitism, and nobody, from the person who drew the cartoon to the sub-editor to the person who lays out the page to the editor themselves, seems to have noticed a grotesque Jewish stereotypical image being put into that newspaper.
Indeed. Gabi, what's your next headline?
The next headline is Newsweek's latest cover story titled "Exodus: Why Europe's Jews Are Fleeing Once Again." It profiles the Europe's entire Jewish community, saying there is a rise in extreme right all over Europe, attacks on Jewish establishments, especially in France and Belgium, even Sweden. A survey published last November said that 29% of European Jews are considering immigrating as they do not feel safe. 76% said anti-Semitism has worsened over the past 5 years.
And they're taking mostly Jews coming from France and Belgium, right?
Yes, but it does profiles the Jewish community in Hungary, in the UK as well. They try to explain this recent change in climate regarding the Jewish community as saying that things have gotten worse since the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, the war in Bosnia, and also just the hardships of immigration. I mean, there's a new generation of Muslim immigrants to Europe, and sometimes they channel their own frustrations onto the Jewish community and the State of Israel.
Jonathan, I want to let you jump in here. We, of course, have heard about French Jews making a quote-unquote exodus. Would you say exodus is perhaps maybe too strong a word to describe the UK Jews?
Well, things people say are slightly better here. We haven't yet experienced anti-Jewish terrorism on the scale that they have in France, but that's not for want of trying. As that Newsweek article does point out, there have been several plots and attempted attacks on Britain, many of them targeting synagogues or Jewish organizations and institutions. And to some, it seems inevitable that this might happen, especially as we read in the news here more and more of the phenomenon of British Muslims going to Syria and Iraq to fight. And these people will be coming back with a training in potentially in terrorist activities. And then those people will be here within the UK, and there's already a fear of being able to monitor all the people coming back from fighting in Syria so that they won't be able to carry out those sorts of attacks. We know that Jews are targets of Islamist attacks, and that terrorism of that sort does often target Jewish institutions, organizations, and buildings. It's already the case, as the Newsweek article points out, that Jewish community buildings have to be guarded and secured in a way that others don't. I mean, the article refers to £2.5 million given by the government through the Community Security Trust here, which is a Jewish-run organization dedicated to looking after the security of the Jewish community. And that money is distributed by the CST to schools so that they can hire guards. Now, when you think about the actual idea that Jewish schools need these guards, they need barbed wire around their perimeters, they need cameras and alarms to an extent that other schools don't, you have to worry about what's going on in that society that makes that necessary. And I think those things mean that British Jews are certain that they're not yet receiving the level of overt violent anti-Semitism that perhaps our neighbours over in France are. But I don't think anyone's complacent that it can't come here and that it won't come here.
Jonathan Sacerdoti there in London, our i24 News correspondent. Thank you for that input. Gabi Tartakovsky, thank you for